Hi friends and welcome to Marvelous Friends, your home for all things Marvel Cinematic Universe and beyond. I'm Rhett and today we're doing my 5 and 5 from Avengers Endgame. Roll that credit. Before we get started, it is obvious to say, spoilers ahead. For anyone who has not, I don't know how it's possible, not seen this movie yet. I wanted to hashtag keep the secrets, so I did wait a full week before I posted this video online. However, moving forward, I don't anticipate that being the case. Most likely I will be posting these relatively soon within the first few days after the initial release. Now, when I say 5 and 5, what I'm talking about is this is my 5 favorite and 5 not so favorite moments of Avengers Endgame. This is how I'm going to be reviewing movies moving forward. Now, when going through Endgame, I had a very hard time narrowing it down to just 5 favorite things. I could, in fact, probably talk all day just about everything I loved in that movie. So, bringing it down to just 5 was very difficult with this one. And likewise, picking 5 things I didn't like about this movie was also truly difficult. I could pinpoint maybe 1 or 2 that was for sure I was not a fan of, but most part, the 5 least favorite things are just that. Least favorite nitpicky things that I thought didn't necessarily work for me or I thought could have potentially been done better. But I didn't absolutely hate it. And what I'm trying to say is here, I really loved this movie. But anyways, with that, let's get started with the countdown, and we're going to start with my 5 favorite things. Number 5, America's Ass. I loved this running joke. It was such a fantastic joke and such a great representation of how the MCU treated itself in this movie. Throughout the film, there was constant references and jokes made about all the previous installments that came before it. And this is just one example, and I'm not talking about the obvious time travel sequences where we literally saw recreations of previous scenes and those same scenes from different perspectives in a lot of those cases. I'm talking about those little subtle ones that the true fans and even some of the casual fans I'm sure noticed. For instance, we saw another representation of that mysterious Budapest mission between Black Widow and Hawkeye. We heard Sam yell on your left as he re-enters the battle with all the previously snapped heroes. We saw almost an exact same copy, speaking of Winter Soldier, of the elevator scene where Cap himself is surrounded by Hydra goons in Winter Soldier. We see Spidey finally use that kill mode that he questioned back in Homecoming. We once again get a reference to the strongest Avenger, the argument of Thor wanting to use the gauntlet to do the snap because he saw himself as the strongest Avenger. But in the end, Hulk takes the snap, and once again, he is the strongest Avenger as his Quinjet code. And the list goes on. These are just a few. Some of the more touching ones, of course, is the reference to cheeseburgers by Happy and Tony's daughter at the funeral scene, referencing, of course, back to the original Iron Man, and when cheeseburgers were the first thing that Tony wanted after his escape and rescue. That one got me. That was one of the moments that I cried. It was great. Loved it. Every second of it. So good. And for the battle to come down to, once again, Tony snapping his fingers and saying, I am Iron Man, a reference to what launched the MCU with those exact same words at the end of Iron Man at his press conference when he declares, I am Iron Man. It began it, and it ended it, and it was so beautiful, so epic, and I could not get enough of these references throughout the movie. Number 4, perfect timing. Now, I'm not talking about comedic timing, which this movie had plenty of, just reference number 5. What I'm talking about is the timing of how everything played out in the movie. And I think the perfect example of this is the final battle sequence, how everything just seemed to fit together with really great timing and precision in it. We didn't have necessarily all of the heroes right away, which I think was really great. When they snapped the finger to return everyone, they did not bring all the heroes together at Avengers HQ. They reappeared where they had. I mean, they could have, I truly do believe they could have those heroes appear wherever they wanted. But by them not being right there, ready to go, it allowed for much more of a fluid and entertaining battle sequence. We saw the Avengers and Thanos both have moments where they were ahead in those initial moments, and we saw more of an ebb and flow as heroes re-entered the battlefield and It allowed for a much more enjoyable battle experience for us as an audience. If we had just seen all of them just rush through Thanos and his army right at the very beginning of the battle, it would have been kind of a letdown, I believe. And I think they really did time this very well. And I know there's one thing that kind of got a little bit of a critique, and that is that Captain Marvel wasn't more prevalent in the battle. Now, I actually had a big critique of her power in Captain Marvel, knowing that she was going to be such a big part in the battle versus Thanos. In her standalone movie, I thought she was way overcharged. I saw that she was just going to fly in and just annihilate everything, really skewing the balance between the Avengers and Thanos, even with or without the gauntlet. I think she would just been too much of a power force. So having her even come a little bit later, after the rest of the resnapped heroes were in the battle, I think was perfect timing, and allowed for, again, that more entertaining of battle where we saw all the returned heroes come in and they started to gain ground, and then Thanos tilted the balance back towards his favor, and then Captain Marvel came in as that next round of reinforcements they needed to push Thanos back once again. Again, I thought this battle had fantastic timing. I thought it was a great battle sequence, and by far the best battle sequence we have seen in Avengers, and not just because of the sheer number of heroes, which we'll get to, but I thought just the timing and the entertainment value of the battle was fantastic. Number three, the Russo brothers deliver their promise. I have to say, to just kind of set up this whole point, that I was a little disappointed in the battle in Infinity War. We were kind of initially promised, of course not officially, and it was retracted somewhat, but roughly over somewhere in the number ballpark of 60 some heroes that we would see in this final battle against Thanos. And when really the massive numbers only came from the Wakandan army, I was a little let down because it's like, where are all of our heroes? Where's all these numbers that you were promised? In fact, in Infinity War, if you count it, we maybe had 20 some named heroes, which was barely a third of what was kind of initially ballparked. And I was a little let down. But did this movie deliver the heroes? They were almost all there. There were a few exceptions, and we'll talk about that as well down in my critiques. But the sheer massive number, even outside just the nameless guard and the random warlocks and the additional space crews and all that stuff, the named heroes were there, and in droves. We had so many, and it was all balanced. Each of them had their little moment within the battle sequence that kind of gave them validation as to why they were there, without kind of taking away or making it feel thrown in, just to kind of FaceTime this hero or that one. Each of them had a purpose for that battle shot, and I was impressed. I didn't think it really was going to happen after Infinity War, especially with not including the Netflix and the TV show heroes, but dang, it was good. Number two, A-Force Assemble. It's no surprise that the MCU, of course, is moving to a much more diverse hero-scape of characters and villains, potentially, with the female heroes going to be playing a big part of that future next step. And there were so many moments in this movie that were great and that received applause and cheers by the audience, or at least in my showing. But one of those moments was definitely when Captain Marvel led the charge to help guide Spidey across the battlefield with the gauntlet, supported by all of her fellow heroines, being supported by Valkyrie, Scarlet Witch, Nebula, Gamora, Rescue, which is Pepper Potts in her Iron Man suit, Mantis, Wasp, Shuri, and Okoye. I will apologize, I am very bad at pronouncing some of the more foreign names. I'm a ignorant American, what can I say? Now, I know a lot of people have critiqued this movie already, saying that it really didn't do quite enough, in their opinion, for the female characters in this film, and I think a lot of that has to do also with Captain Marvel kind of being very absent and not playing as big of a role as they thought she would, considering the importance of her own standalone movie right before this. But I'm not going to get into that. I'm not here to debate all that. I'm just saying I really enjoyed this, and from the reaction it got in theater, I think a lot of other people did as well. And it's something I would love to see. For those who do not know what I'm talking about, A-Force is a division of the Avengers. It's a ops team that is comprised completely of female superheroes and heroines. Usually it is led by Captain Marvel or She-Hulk, which unfortunately at this time, due to contracts with other companies, She-Hulk is not available to the MCU, but fingers crossed that she does become available eventually. I think she would be a fantastic addition, and she does play quite a substantial role often with the Avengers and within the Marvel comics altogether. But all that aside, I would love to see an A-Force film. Now, I always kind of was suspecting that the Black Widow film that was coming was going to be kind of the introduction or be the kind of conduit for an A-Force film. But with the events of Endgame and the sudden death of Black Widow, I'm not so sure that is going to be the direction of the Black Widow standalone movie. I foresee it now being a lot more of a kind of prequel origin story, but we will, of course, be talking about that in due time. But anyways, that being said, I love this little moment within the battle. I thought it was great, and I still am hoping and praying for an A-Force film. And number one favorite, Iron Man saves the Avengers and the world. Now, this, of course, was, I believe, the point that if you weren't already feeling it, uh, this hit you when Iron Man snapped his fingers, declared that he is Iron Man one last time, and dusted, literally, Thanos and his army. It was such a great moment for Tony to finally get the chance to do what he's been striving to do since the beginning of his story. He created the Iron Man suit to undo the wrongdoing he saw that his company did and save the lives of those that he felt responsible for putting in harm's way for not properly dealing with his arms selling and that whole process. We see that continued in the future Iron Man movies as he just is driven to protect his family, Pepper, those around him. We see him being very protective of Spider-Man and a young Peter Parker, not really wanting to push him out there and knowing that he doesn't want to put him in harm's way and that he is responsible for him, for bringing him into this greater MCU. And he's always been that protector. And this was, of course, escalated by the events of Age of Ultron, where we saw the vision that Scarlet Witch put in his head, and ever since that, really and truly, almost to a kind of unhealthy degree, has he been obsessed with saving those around him, feeling that he is responsible if they are killed, lost, what have you. And ultimately, he can rest easy knowing that he has done his ultimate mission. And I thought that was just a beautiful full circle of him finally being to, as I said, rest easy. As Pepper put it, he can rest now, having completed this. Now we are going to move on to my least favorite 5 things. Now I will say these are going to be a little bit longer because I felt like I had to justify these a little bit more, where everything else was much more obvious as to why it was such a great moment. I feel like I had to kind of back myself up on some of these opinions, or there was just a lot more reasoning that I felt I had to explain maybe to myself as to why this wasn't my favorite thing or why I wasn't necessarily a big fan of it. So let's get started with that. So with number 5, underutilized characters. I kind of touched on this with my favorites, talking about the balance and all the characters and how they all got their moment and how there was just so many of them and we got to see almost all of them. There were a few characters that I was very noticeably aware of were not present, and I'm just talking about characters that were in the film because we obviously were told over and over and over and over again that unfortunately the TV, Netflix, all those characters were not going to be transitioning to film. Now I was very happy to know that at one point the Russo brothers were trying to make it work, but ultimately, of course, it was a no-go. So there was no Daredevil. There's not going to be Luke Cage or the other Defenders. There's not going to be Cloak and Dagger. There's not going to be the Runaways. There's not going to be Quake or Slingshot. You know, all those characters were off limits. So I am specifically talking about characters that we have seen in other MCU films that did not make an appearance. The first couple, of course, are from Black Panther. Now, we did see, of course, the huge Wakandan army, and maybe they were stuck in there for, you know, extras, but we didn't actually get to see them have a moment, whereas all the other main characters that are named in Black Panther and showed up in the first Avengers part of this saga in Infinity War, they weren't there. So I kind of was left a little disappointed that we didn't see them. We also have not seen Lady Sif for a long time in the Thor franchise. Now, I know there was some scheduling issues, and that's why she was not part of Ragnarok, but it has left us to believe then that Lady Sif is alive and did not suffer the fate as the rest of Thor's posse did in Ragnarok at the hand of Hela. So this would have been a great moment for her to come back, and she would have been a great addition to the posse of ladies backing up Captain Marvel, and had a little bit of a Thor representation in that group. Speaking of ladies that were absent, we did not get Ghost from a very recent movie as well. Ant-Man and the Wasp had just come out in between these two movies as well, so I thought we would probably be seeing Ghost, which is kind of an anti-hero by the end of that film, and I thought she would have been a great asset to the team, especially with her phasing ability, being able to help guide Spidey across the battlefield, phasing him in and out of various obstacles and other villains and stuff like that. So I was a little disappointed to see that we were missing those characters. And then, of course, there's just some characters I thought were a little bit underused that were in the film. We did, of course, get Natalie Portman. It is a little unclear if that was just spliced together footage from Ragnarok that they kind of pieced together to make a full scene, or if they actually brought Natalie Portman in. I'm not 100% sure on that, because she did technically have a third movie still to her contract, so they maybe cashed that in. If it is the latter, I'm a little disappointed with it. It kind of was lackluster. They really didn't use her very much. Like I said, it almost seemed just like spliced together footage from actual Ragnarok, maybe some other angles and camera shoots they didn't use to piece it together. But I would have liked to see her used a little bit more. Again, we really didn't have any lady characters outside of, well, I guess we had Valkyrie, of course, but outside of her from the Thor franchise, and even Valkyrie could be argued being a little bit of a Hulk franchise as well, since Ragnarok was really just as much of a Hulk movie as it was a Thor movie. But I digress. I think Natalie Portman would have been a great asset in this movie. Maybe just kind of figure out where she was in this part of the snap process, maybe, I don't know. But hey, also I would not have hated to see Lady Thor, see her pick up the hammer and give it a go, and see a Lady Thor appearance roll quick from Jane Foster. But anyways, I also thought the characters of Nick Fury and Agent Hill were very underutilized. I think they could have been seen in the battle sequence as well, flying a Quinjet or a hangar into battle to fight, shooting off some missiles and taking down some of the air squad, because a lot of the battle we did see was on the ground. We didn't really see any of the aerials outside of Valkyrie riding her steed, but they could have easily been put in there, and then really and truly didn't say anything even at the end when they were more clearly featured at the funeral sequence, kind of making them throw away extras, I felt. So I really could have seen a little bit more of them in the film. But I don't know. It's really tough, again, critiquing, really nitpicking here on these kind of things, because I really did think there was a lot of characters that were really well used, but there's just a few of these characters I would have liked to see maybe more from, or actually seen it all. Number 4, the passing of the Shield. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying I have no issue with who he chose. In fact, in most iterations of the comics, I actually like Sam's Captain America more than I like Bucky's Captain America. It was more so that I was just really surprised that they chose to pick either of them. Of course, there was a lot of debate moving throughout the MCU after the introduction of these two characters in Winter Soldier, like, oh, well, both of these characters have been Captain America in the comics, so this obviously is a sign that when Chris Evans is done with the movies, that one of these two will be it, and there was a lot of debate back and forth, and I thought that made for some great theories and all that stuff, but I was really personally surprised that they went through with picking either of them. With Chris Evans' contract up and Tony being as well out because of Robert Downey Jr.'s, I thought there was going to be much so more of a true break from Captain America and from Iron Man. I thought we were going to see kind of just a step away from them and eventually having them come back in, but for them to kind of immediately step out and have a Captain America moving forward, I thought was a little surprising. I think personally I would have liked much more of a clean break from the character, and then, like I said, revisit it later on down the road, because it kind of, I don't know, I think you're going to get some mixed feelings with people with there being a new captain that is not Chris Evans or Steve Rogers. Now again, for those of you who aren't aware, both of those, Bucky Barnes and Sam and Wilson have on multiple occasions taken up the mantra of Captain America from Steve Rogers, and so you know I think it's great that they picked someone. I'm happy we're not losing Captain America. I guess in the long run, I think it'll create a very interesting dynamic for the movies, and especially for Falcon and Winter Soldier's little TV show, which I'm sure is going to be much more of a buddy cop kind of series on the Disney Plus format. But yeah, I'm interested to see what they're doing with it. But I personally would have liked to have had more of just a true break from Captain America following the leaving of Chris Evans. But again, pulling hairs, being very nitpicky. Number 3, Thor's new look. Now, I know the Russos have come out since the film's debut explaining why they did what they did with Thor, but I'm still not a fan. I get it. He is grieving. He is upset. He is taking a lot of that personal blame and guilt onto himself because he had the moment to take Thanos down before the snap happened the first time, and he missed by literally inches. And he takes that very hard, which I think in context anyone would. And in fact, we see almost all, well, not almost all of the Avengers that have survived are grieving in some way. Of course, we don't see all that necessarily from every character's perspective because some of them aren't necessarily 100% present during the first portions of the movie, but we see grief in different ways. We see Captain America channeling grief into something positive by leading those help groups that we see him in as he tries to help others. We see Black Widow channel it into her work, becoming obsessed with trying to fix what she can in the world, not being able to fix what she would want to. We see a very much so kind of supportive role, which I thought was very interesting, coming from War Machine, who's willing to help the others in their grieving process and do what he can for them. And I thought that was very interesting considering he is much more of a sidekick role. And then we see others such as Tony, who grieves by moving on. He kind of witnessed a lot more trauma through the process, having been trapped in space and having to have lost Peter. So we see him kind of just, I won't say ignore the grief, but channel it into moving forward. He moves forward, starts a family, moves forward with Pepper, and channels his grief through that way and bringing something new to his life to move on. And of course, then we see Hawkeye down into a whole new spiral and becoming Ronin with the loss of his family and kind to correct the wrongs because he channels it into almost anger and wrath, trying to delete the good that survived this. I mean, excuse me, deleted the bad that survived the snap when so much good, including his family, was not survived. But with Thor, I thought it kind of took away from his appearance. It was kind of off-putting, which again, I get that they were going for a shock value, but it was just, I didn't like it. I think they could have represented Thor's internal grieving and blame and self-hate for what happened in Infinity War a lot better than by just putting him in honestly a bad fat suit. Now I will say I am happy that when he picked up his hammer and axe again, that it didn't just magically six-pack abs him. He kept the new look and it's still a part of him. But again, not a fan. Number 2, 5 years later. In the theories that I saw, that I discussed with friends and other fans, and kind of came up with on my own, we of course knew that time travel was going to be a big part of it. And in fact, most everyone thought as well that we would see, before the actual events of the movie really laid out, we would see a time jump into the future as time has passed between the initial war with Thanos and where they kind of re-energize into that new battle. And we see that as a 5-year time jump into the future, which is very important to remember now that technically all future MCU movies are set 5 years further into the future. So again, interesting point of departure, as most of the time it's kind of been the precedent that whatever movie is airing at the time is happening at the moment that you're watching it. So we'll see how that affects things, but anyways, what I'm trying to get to with this is that it's going to create a very interesting dynamic. So Tony was very specific to the Hulk that he wanted everyone to be snapped to the point where they are now, not to reverse the snap and go back to the initial battle and retry it now that they have kind of this better advantage, which is what I and I think a lot of other kind of theorists and speculators kind of felt as well that we were going to see basically just a redo of that initial battle. But instead, we saw a new battle in 5 years in the future. So, why is this kind of my least favorite thing? It's raising a lot of questions. It's not so much so something I hate. I think it's just leaving a lot of question marks for myself, and based upon what I've heard from other people who've seen the movie and talked to other fans about, like they have a lot of these same questions, and it's just, what does this mean? How is this going to affect the MCU moving forward? And especially when we talked about time travel so much and time's effects or lack thereof, which I'm getting to. Uh, you know, this has to have repercussions. They move 5 years in the future, and you're just going to say everything's going to move forward hunky dory, and it's not going to have any effect. We've already seen Spider-Man's next movies, trailers, and we have a lot of information for that already. And basically, we've seen Spider-Man, Peter Parker's little friend group is all together in that film, and so you're telling me that when 50% of the world population got decimated, including Peter Parker, everyone else moved forward 5 years, and then those who are returning at the same age they were, but now just 5 years in the future. That Peter's entire friend circle ended up together in the future. I gotta call a little bit of shenanigans on that, and I think there needs to be repercussions. I think there needs to be moments like that moving forward with these films where we see characters who didn't age versus who did. I thought that it was kind of a miss that we really didn't get some more explanation with Black Panther and what happened there, because Black Panther, of course, is not T'Challa. Black Panther is the current president of Wakanda. So to see just T'Challa walking back into battle in his Black Panther suit like it's no big deal was kind of like, well, no, they would have had to have elected a new monarchy and gone through that whole process again, technically, because you can't just leave a country without leadership. So I thought, I don't know, I just felt that there wasn't enough impact for the 5 year displacement that there should have been. Of course, there was a lot to fit in a 3 hour movie, and we got a lot of content, so I'm putting a lot of that burden on Spider-Man's movie, and we will talk about that movie moving forward, upcoming in future videos. But we got some explaining to do, MCU. We got some explaining to do. And my number one least favorite thing is the rules of time travel. Like I said, in just number two, I would talk about this in much more detail. Marvel really went for it with their own kind of precedented rules of how time is affected, almost contradicting itself within those rules and within this movie, both with kind of previous knowledge from other MCU movies and kind of what we as an audience came into it with, having seen other films and entertainment aspects that deal with time travel. We kind of have built into us a very set rule book of how time travel works. If you go back and do anything, how it potentially can butterfly effect on down to affect the current time. And that's kind of why it's very important that you don't interact with yourself in the and you go into the past. You don't do anything that will significantly cause major upsets, and that's why they were going to points where the stones were contained and not necessarily actively being used. They went to very specific times that it wouldn't necessarily affect to have those stones removed, or at least so they thought. However, when we see Bruce Banner going after the Time Stone and talking to the Ancient One in New York City, she contradicts this. She confirms this, rather, sorry. She confirms this, saying that, if you remove these stones from their time, it will create divergent timelines. And so therefore, you must return the stones exactly where they came from. And Doctor Strange kind of confirmed this as well, as he gets kind of ridiculed and talked down to about messing with time from Wong, saying that he can't do that because messing with time can have very horrible consequences. And yet, when Bruce Banner talks about time travel, it's very much so what is will always be, and what was shall always have happened. It's kind of that, like, do whatever, no consequences kind of thing. Like, and we see a lot of that. We see Captain America not only interact with himself, but out himself as a Hydra agent, which is a very nice reference to Captain America Run, where he is actually a secret Hydra agent plant within S.H.I.E.L.D. So I did enjoy that reference, but it does kind of cause some issues because now there's a whole group of people that think Captain America is part of Hydra. We also see Captain America knock himself out significantly. We see Loki escape with the Tesseract. We see countless instances of this as people are interacting and changing things. We also, Captain America now knows Bucky's alive, a movie and a half too early. Like, it's just, there's a lot of things that they kind of meddle with. But the biggest ones is now Gamora is time displaced. So she has never met Peter Quill. And yet he's in love with her. And I believe that is going to be, and again, we'll talk about this moving forward, the main aspect of the third Guardians movie, or at least a portion of that, is as they go out and look for Gamora as we see them taking off. He is looking at the screen saying that Gamora is missing. But yet he's never met her, so how does he still love her? And same thing with Nebula. She shot her past self, so how is she still in existence? Because now she's never been to the point that led her to where she is now. So it's just a lot of fuckery, honestly. Excuse my language. But so I wasn't really happy with the kind of the reinforcement of having to do certain things by the books, but there was no consequences moving forward, which kind of plays into my number two as well. You know, we have to see some repercussions for these kind of meddlings and stuff like that, but unfortunately we really can't, considering a lot of those meddlings happened with Captain America, and we no longer have that Captain America. But I hope we do get some kind of explanation in Guardians of the Galaxy 3 about those effects with Nebula and Gamora. And like I said, the 5-year jump with Peter in the Far From Home movie coming out here soon. So, but yeah, I felt a little disrespected with the time travel thing and left with a lot of question marks that really need answers. So like I said, most of my top 5 least favorite things were very nitpicky things, but number 2 and number 1 were definitely much more things that really kind of bothered me and I think really needed to be addressed more than they were. And even like the rules that Bruce explained were very confusing and not clear. And so I was just kind of like left with, what did he mean by that? And then what's happening now and all that kind of stuff. So like I said with number 2, Marvel, you have some explaining to do with your future MCU films, and I hope you do answer some of those questions because I think they're very big questions. But that's it for my 5 and 5. I would love to know what you think. Let me know in the comments below, like what your favorite moment was, what questions or issues you have left after watching Endgame. You know, were you unhappy with anything that was kind of left up in the air? But definitely let me know your favorites because I love hearing everyone's favorites. Everyone has such a different moment in the movie that they pinpoint as like, that was it. That's what I really love. So I'd love to hear yours. Of course, subscribe to my channel and set those alerts so you can get all those future videos I kind of hinted at as we were going through this list. And until next time, have a marvelous day, my friends. And I love you 3000. Bye, friend.